Sir, it has been argued that it is in human nature that you can differentiate between the tayyib and the khabith. But when we look at the Chinese culture, they eat all kind of things. So is it that,
Right.
is it culture plays a role in there?
So I started answering this question by saying that when you pick up a sample regarding what people do or they don't do, you just don't concentrate on a particular area of the globe, and that too for a particular period of time. So if we take the whole humankind as a sample in this regard, you'll find that ever since the creation of Adam, and of course after him we had all of the prophets of God, and a very big and a huge chunk of Muslim of religious history in which prophets of God came. If you count humanity ever since that era, from that period up to right up till now, you will find that this is an exception which the Chinese and some of the other nations indulge in. So if they do this, they are actually, the reasons could be several. This could be because of perversion of human nature. This could be because some of the external influential and environmental factors as well that we can analyze. But if people say that why is it that their innate guidance is not guiding them and the way it is guiding the rest of humankind, the answer, as I said, would be that humankind as a whole has to be taken in this regard. And if you take it as a whole, ever since the inception of mankind right up to today, you will find, I could say, if I can go on and say that maybe even 90% or 95% of humankind has always remained averse to eating such things as these Chinese eat. So if their nature is telling them something different, it's an exceptional case. It's a case of perversion, and that perversion is something which has its origins in a lot of things which can be analyzed and discussed.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Saleem. My question was, how do we categorize langars at mazars and the food that people distribute at the barsi of a loved one? These are distributed amongst the poor for the most part, which is what explains it, and that's how people explain it. But the idea behind the food distribution is for sabab of the departed. So how would this fit into the categories?
If the food is not dedicated to any other person, because of course Muslims would not dedicate it to a deity, they could dedicate it for the dead person or to some other saint. If that is not the case, and if it's just a pure question of feeding the poor in such places, or in the case of a deceased person's death, we cannot say that it is prohibited. So it all depends on the intention or the way we present it. If there is no such thing involved, if you're not dedicating the food to any other person or deity, it's absolutely fine. But if you think that you are doing this by dedicating it to the dead person or to someone else, then we should abstain from consuming it.
अभी आपने फरमाया कि अगर कोई बंदा है जो कि अल्लाह पे यकीन नहीं रखता और तो उसका जो स्लाटर किया हुआ या सही तरीके से स्लाटर करे तो हम नहीं खा सकते. तो फिर जो आजकल ये क्रिश्चियन अहले किताब कहते हैं वो तो सीधे सीधे शिरक करते हैं. वो जब हज़रत ईसा अलैहिस्सलाम को अल्लाह का बेटा मानते हैं तो फिर उनके साथ उनका कैसे खा सकते हैं हम?
So I think I answer this question by saying that even though the people of the book, they are incriminated with various forms of polytheism, but they still subscribe to monotheism. And this was the case even at the time of the revelation of the Quran. The Christians of those times still called themselves, still had this belief that Jesus is the Son of God. But in spite of that, God allowed it. Why? Because you see, when they say that He's the Son of God, they don't interpret it to mean that it's a form of polytheism. They say that this is monotheism, and they explain it in a certain way. The Quran does not accept this explanation, but because they themselves say that they are monotheists, the Quran has accepted that. So we eat their food because primarily they are monotheists. And their example is the example of a Muslim who is a person who subscribes to Tawheed, but still he goes to shrines and prostrates before saints, and he starts invoking that saint that please pray for me that God accepts my wish. So you see, the case of a Muslim is also no different. He might subscribe to monotheism, but he might deviate and follow certain polytheistic practices. So the case of a Christian is also the same, that primarily they believe in one God, but that belief in one God has that deviation. It has a wrong ring to it. And the Quran actually accepted this when it said that, because you see that the Christians of the times of the Prophet himself, they believed to be Jesus to be the Son of God. And in spite of that, the Quran allowed their meat to be consumed. Because, as I said, they were primarily monotheists. And they had deviated into practices of polytheism, just as Muslims are primarily monotheists, but they do certain acts of polytheism. So, doing certain acts of polytheism does not make a person polytheist. It only makes him a deviant monotheist.
Just to clarify my mind, I'm going to ask you one little question again. Okay, if or now people who live in Europe or America, we don't eat that meat because once it's not slaughtered at all, if they slaughter it, then that confusion would come in place. I think what you are mentioning.
Right. Yes, because when you are in such countries, the reason for your not consuming such meat is because the name of God has not been invoked. So that is another important distinction that has to be made. So you see, the distinctions are three. The name of God has to be positively taken. The way that you slaughter that animal has to be in a way that all the blood gushes out. And thirdly, the person who slaughters should be primarily a monotheist. So these are the three conditions which have to be met for halal slaughter. The three conditions. The person.
So they go to Jews shops and they say that's okay because Jews.
Yes, it is okay because you see the Jews they when they eat kosher, they invoke the name of God to the best of my understanding. So precisely for this reason, the name of God is taken. The slaughter is done in the correct way, so the blood gushes out, and of course Jews are monotheists as well. So always remember that there are these three conditions. Whenever they are fulfilled, we will say that the slaughter is a halal slaughter and it can be consumed.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. I had a question of my own, and this is related to, there are people that eat all kinds of meat despite being Muslims. They don't care if it's dhabiha or not. And I know that if you go to someone's place and they know that you only eat dhabiha, then you should assume, in goodwill that they will offer you what's halal. But I've had instances where some of my friends have offered me things and then it turned out that they weren't really halal. Or at least I didn't see them as being halal. And so in those situations, with Ramadan coming, is it okay to question whoever's house you're going to if what they're presenting you with is halal, or should you abstain from doing that?
I think if they themselves say that they are offering halal meat, it is enough that you trust them. In case of a breach of trust, maybe if you are slightly doubtful, you can always ask that, we are bound by our religion to eat certain things and not eat certain things. And I think people respect this a lot. So, in the first case, it's perfectly fine to trust them. But it could be the case that by trusting them, because they themselves might not be knowing whether they are doing the right thing or not, and later on you get to know. So even if you ask them that this is how you are required to eat certain things, I don't think it should be a problem, and it should be a cause of any consternation or bother. However, if there is, this is not possible, then I think if you just trust the person on his word that yes, we are offering halal meat and we know what halal meat is, I think that should be sufficient.
The term Rabb al-Alameen, and the question is, Alameen is Al-Alameen is generally interpreted as the worlds or the universe, but the plural of Al-Alam or for the worlds is Al-Awalim, not Al-Alameen. And so in Arabic, all of these words that end with "een" correspond to human beings, specifically to male human beings, but in general, they could also be for any gender, for example, Muslimin, Sajidin, and so on. And so from this interpretation, taken together, can we say that Rabb al-Alameen specifically refers to all human beings, whether dead or alive, instead of the world or the universe?
First, I think this is not correct to say that the plural alimun or alameen is not correct, and only the plural is awalim. This is common knowledge that alameen is equally a plural word. And the second important thing is that in the Arabic language, in classical Arabic, plurals are not always used to connote multiple entities. They are also used to connote the vastness or the unboundedness of something. So, for example, Rabbul Mashariq wal Magharib, as you can see in the Quran, that He is the Lord of the Easts and the Wests. The Mashariq is the plural of Mashriq, Magharib is the plural of Maghrib. Similarly, you see words like Hasarat, Hasarat means regret, but it is used in the plural and doesn't mean a lot of shame. It only, of course, reflects the abundance of something. So we have to understand that in classical Arabic language, first, as I said, I think I need to correct the person who has asked this, that alimun is also an equally plural word of the word alim. And secondly, in Arabic, classical Arabic, plurals are not always meant for multiplicity. They are also meant to connote the vastness. The word Rabbul Alameen, as a result, would mean the Lord of this vast universe, this expansive universe. Instead of translating it to be the Lord of the worlds or the Lord of the universe, all the universes, the connotation of the word Alameen here is the vastness of the expanse of what God has created.
We know from the Sunnah of Prophet ﷺ that whenever he traveled or during the rain, he combined Zuhr and Asr. So what does these Imams play the role, like the Imam Shafi'i and so on? So according to Shafi'i, you can't do it. According to Hanafi, you can do it, type of deal. So when established that the Prophet ﷺ Sunnah is there, how do you distinguish between one Imam's decision versus the other?
This is on the basis of their own principles which they have formulated. So you see, the Hanafis, if they do something, they have their own principles of jurisprudence. For example, they would say that something which should have been done in a way that many people should have reported an incident, but only few people end up reporting that incident, then that thing is not reliable. To give an example, they would say if there was a fire somewhere and only a couple of people report that, maybe one person, whereas there was a whole population who was witnessing that fire or affected by it. So in that case, if one person says that it was this event had happened, then we would not believe that person, because it is against common sense that all the rest would not say so. So similarly, the Shafi'i and the Hanabilas and the Malikis, I'm just giving you one example, they have formulated their principles of jurisprudence as per which they interpret the whole practice of the Prophet. Another example is, for example, the Malikis, or the people who follow the Maliki law, for example, in North Africa, in Spain. They would see, well, the Prophet, when he shortened his prayer, they would typically say that it was after 40 miles maybe, or after 30 miles, or whatever distance that they interpret. The reason is that they rely on certain narratives in which the Prophet shortened his prayer after such a mileage that he had traveled. But you see other Imams doing it on a lesser for a lesser period of time. For example, 9 miles, or for maybe 5 days or 7 days. So each of these jurists, they formulate their own interpretations as a result of their principles which I just referred to. And for one, these principles would say that we have to look upon the Prophet or one hadith of the Prophet which is stronger than the rest, which tells us, well, this is the time period for shortening the prayers. We cannot do it beyond that time period. And this is the extent of the mileage that has to be traveled to shorten the prayer. And the other, for example, jurists would on the other hand say that some other narratives which are stronger than what you have interpreted, then they don't refer to, let's say, 40 miles or 50 miles. They say it's 9 miles or 11 miles. So either they will rely on a hadith which to them would be more powerful than the person, or than the hadith which the other Imam has relied upon, or, as I said, they would have some of their own principles. So this is basically a line of reasoning which just is consequential to the principles that they have formulated. And there are subtle differences regarding the principles that have been formulated by all these 4 giant people.
So would the same principle apply to the prayers when Prophet ﷺ, as it said, that he combined the Asr and Dhuhr together?
I think if you ask me, as I said, if you ask me the way I've studied it, I think that it's a question of your personal preference. The Prophet himself, if you look at various narratives, he shortened his prayer on different occasions for different distances, because basically it was his personal discomfort. On some occasions, he felt that discomfort after 10 miles. On certain other occasions, he felt it after 30 miles. So instead of relating it to the discomfort, people started relating it to the distance which he had traveled. So the essence of this whole matter is, it's not the distance that you have traveled, it's the discomfort which has actually inflicted you. So as long as you feel that discomfort, and what do I mean by discomfort? Discomfort means the discomfort of the journey itself. When you're traveling, of course, you're not in a very comfortable position. You have certain things that you, in normal circumstances, that you would not have. So as long as you feel the discomfort of the journey, you are authorized to shorten the prayer. And as I said, it's not just a journey, it could be other reasons as well. So discomfort could be because of sickness, it could be because of any other valid reason, something which is out of the normal. So when something which is out of the normal happens, it warrants or gives the person the authority, it could be subjective of course, to decide for himself or herself.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Saleem. I was last night I was listening to your lecture on the first revelation, and what I have understood from it is that the idea of Ghar Hira somehow does not fit into the narrative. Now, of course, all my life I've believed that Ghar Hira is where the revelation happened, and then so many other people who I speak to, I feel it's so hard to convince people. My question to you is, in Christianity, we see a lot of Greek mythology, kind of that mythology bled into the belief. Is there any history of some cave where revelations happened and that's how it crept into storytelling? If that did not really happen and it's fictional, and the Prophet only got his revelations, at ground level in Makkah or Medina. Is there any references? Because I was trying to find them last night, but is there anything you can point me to towards as far as the reference of?
There are no such references. The only reference is that narrative of Bukhari. But as far as the Prophet stationing himself in the cave of Hira is concerned, we do find in the Sirat of Ibn Ishaq, one of the foremost biographies of the Prophet, in which the Prophet would go and do itikaf in the Ghar Hira. And that is a totally different thing from the Quran being revealed to him. So it does seem that because the Kaaba or the Baytullah was, it had a number of idols in the times of when the Prophet was living in Mecca. And so perhaps it was to his distaste that he would go and do itikaf there. So we do have this news from the biography of Ibn Ishaq, which tells us that the Prophet, and even before the Prophet, his grandfather and the Quraysh in general, they had this tradition that the Ghar Hira or the cave of Hira would be used for this isolation, for this stationing of in isolation is concerned that we do in itikaf. So they did this itikaf in the cave of Hira, and that is all that we know. But revelation of the Quran is something which is actually something that we got to know from that narrative of Imam Bukhari, which we see in Bukhari, the Sahih Bukhari. Otherwise, this is something that will not feature. It will not feature anywhere else.